So what we have on the screen is a figure that tries to tell you what is going to happen when maternal energy intake is restricted. So on the right hand side you see optimal diet. On the left hand side you see a caloric restriction that is about 40%. So what you see is that if you are going to feed the mother and a diet that is energy replete, so with adequate amount of energy, so there is going to be very little change in the baby's brain programming. And because the mother's diet is sufficient in energy, then that means the supply of energy to the baby is also going to be sufficient. So there will only be small amounts of ketones that are transferred to the baby's brain, and the baby's brain tissue can effectively metabolize most of them. So there is actually going to be very little fetal programming effect of a normal healthy diet. But if there is a caloric restriction in the mother's diet, then there would be a very high amount of ketones, okay? High amounts of ketones, and also something called pro-oxidative metabolites, which would then cross the placental barrier to get into the baby's body, to the fetus body. And actually the gut tissue cannot metabolize ketones very well. And therefore, without adequate supply of glucose in caloric restriction, the mother's body would start to switch to use ketone as an energy source. That is the normal physiological response. But the ketones that are produced by the mother's body cannot actually provide the energy needed for the baby's or the fetus gut tissue to grow, because the gut tissues cannot metabolize ketones. And therefore, the energy available to the gut in the fetal issue is restricted. And this would then have an effect to program the baby for what we call the orexogenic signal, so promoting eating, because the baby can now sense that nutrient availability is very low. So to survive when he or she is born, the best thing for him or her to do is to actively seek food. Okay? So regardless of food availability, the best thing by nature that's designed to do in this situation is to eat as much as you can. So this is what fetal programming would actually do to the fetus, unborn fetus, when the mother's diet is energy deficient. And there are actually a lot of studies, even very early on in 1976, to show that babies who were exposed to famine, okay, very little amount of food, so hunger in utero, in the mother's uterus, and also during early infancy. That's most likely during the war period. Okay, so this is World War II, and this is talking about the Dutch famine. All right. So babies who were born exposed to famine during pregnancy as well as during early infancy would have actually got a higher rate of obesity later in life. So during the first half of pregnancy, the exposure to famine would result in significantly higher obesity rates later in life. And also there will be an accumulation of excess fat in an organism to its predetermined maximum size when there is increased food availability. So after war, the world start to rebuild, and to come with it would be the economic improvements and everything that makes the society, the population well off. And food would become much more available compared with during the war period. So it is this fetal programming effect that increases the orexogenic signal, together with the increased food availability, that is going to cause problem with obesity later in life of these babies exposed to famine during pregnancy and early infancy. And why are we so worried about the fetal programming effect? That is because our understanding of reproductive physiology tells us that fetal programming effects can not only affect the mother and the baby, just the 2 generations, but also the subsequent generations that are to come. So in research or in medicine, we call the first generation F0, and then the next generation F1, F2, F3, etc. So when the mother's diet is poor, of course, it is going to affect the mother's nutritional status and health, but also it would have a programming effect on the unborn fetus, as we have shown. But it doesn't stop there, because inside the unborn fetus, there would already be some gametes. Okay, in girls, it would be eggs. In boys, it would be cells that produce sperms. Okay, so these would also be somehow programmed, and these would eventually develop into an embryo and a fetus and then a baby who grows into an adult to further transmit the genome that has been epigenetically altered. And this kid who are born to the F1 would then also carry the gametes that would be affected. Okay, so that's developed from this single cell inside the F1 fetus, and that would transmit on and on and on. So it would be an intergenerational effect that is much more worrying than affecting the nutritional status of 1 generation. So what could possibly happen in pregnancy? There are 2 possible scenarios: nutrient restrictions, as in famine or hunger, or excess nutrients. We are going to see more of this in developed countries, and we're going to see more of nutrient restrictions in third world countries, developing countries. But both are also detrimental to the maternal and fetal health. So what nutrition restriction would do is that at birth, it can result in a reduced ovarian size because there is growth restriction inside the mother's uterus. There will be increased circulating FSH and decrease in primordial follicles, so affecting female reproductive health, which then, and puberty, babies who are exposed to nutrient restrictions would have advanced or delayed menarche, okay, the first menstruation, and they might have advanced or delayed vaginal opening, increased adrenal androgen secretion. So we're talking about females. So androgen is male hormone. So we should not expect to see increased androgen in females, but the maternal nutrition during pregnancy would have a programming effect to affect this, and also hyperinsulinemia. During adulthood, then this woman would be affected by the fetal program to have decreased follicle number, early onset of menopause, decrease in follicle growth factors, and low ovulation rates, having a bad effect on fertility. On the other hand, if there's excess nutrients during pregnancy, then it can also cause troubles, but not exactly the same as in nutrient restrictions. So it would cause decrease in follicle numbers, early menarche, and hyperleptinemia, and increased adiposity. Then it can decrease the fecundity, is the success of fertilization. Okay, so it can decrease the success of fertilization in sheep or in mice. Okay, it can disrupt the estrous cyclicity in young adult rats. So disrupting the normal reproductive cycle, menstrual cycle of the women, basically. And we are seeing increasing in prevalence of overweight and obesity in many populations, and that would mean more females at reproductive age are either overweight or obese. In the United States, it would be about 20-25%, okay, and it's going to be higher if the current trend of overweight and obesity is still continuing. In Hong Kong, it's not much better. Okay, so and there are many studies showing that maternal obesity, even at conception, okay, even if the mother is going to do the best thing that she can after she knows that she's pregnant, being obese at the time when the baby is conceived is already going to have some programming effect for obesity in the baby. So this is a rat study, which shows that there are 4 groups. Okay, lean mother feeding on a controlled diet, lean mother feeding on a high-fat diet, obese mother on controlled diet, obese mother on a high-fat diet. So what you can see is that when you compare the lean control versus obese control, being obese alone, okay, even if the mother is still eating the best diet that she can, is already going to have an effect of the offspring body weight postnatal day when the offspring is born. At 140 days after the offspring is born, there is already a maybe 50-gram difference between the lean control and the obese control. But what's more worrying is that if the mother is obese to start with and she keeps on feeding on junk diets, this effect is much more pronounced. Okay, so it's going to exacerbate the body weight gain in the offspring very badly. Okay, and when you look at the dietary composition of the 2 groups, of course the high-fat diet group is going to have a higher energy intake compared with the control group. So when you look at the insulin level of the rats fed different diets, okay, so those who are fed a controlled diet, of course, would have a better insulin sensitivity. So this is also talking about the offspring's diet, not the mother's diet. So when the offspring is born to an obese mother, even if he or she is eating well, these rats are eating well, the insulin level is still going to be higher than rats born with to a lean mother. But if the mice is born to a lean mother and fed a high-fat diet, then this rat is still going to have better insulin response compared with those who are born to an obese mother and fed a high-fat diet. So the worst case is this. So therefore, in 2010, actually the fetal programming effect has made the cover of the Times magazine, and is based on this particular study published in one of the best journal, Nature. Chronic high-fat diet in fathers program beta cell dysfunction in female offsprings. So what you should see from this particular study is from graphs like this. So if you compare those who are fed, those parents who are fed a controlled diet versus fathers in particular, who was fed a high-fat diet, the body weight of the mice, rats fed a high-fat diet, fathers fed a high-fat diet, is going to have a higher body weight at 14 weeks compared with fathers, rat born to a father fed a controlled diet. Total energy intake is higher in the high-fat diet group. Glucose level is higher in the high-fat diet group. Insulin is higher. So area under the curve is higher. So high-fat diet can actually lead to adiposity, glucose intolerance, and insulin resistance in the father. But then when you look at the offsprings, it's also going to have an effect of the offspring's glucose insulin, and then resistance index, insulin resistance index. So the female offspring would also demonstrate impaired glucose tolerance and insulin secretion to a glucose challenge. And this is another study from Hong Kong, looking at the effect of paternal diet and birth weight. So when you paternal BMI and birth weight. So the effect is very strong if the father or the mother's BMI is about 25. The offspring is going to have a significant higher risk of being overweight or obese at 6 to 7 years of age. So 166% higher risk if the father is overweight, and 407% higher if the mother is overweight or obese. So undernutrition is of course going to cause this growth restriction, which at the childhood would cause survival, enhanced survival and catch-up growth. If not, the baby is less likely to survive. And overnutrition, on the other hand, is also going to cause trouble because it's going to make the baby too large at birth with excessive body fat. And then with normal or increased food availability or a high-fat, high-calorie diet could induce obesity. And obese mothers would again have a higher risk of giving birth to a macrosomic baby or babies with excess body fat. That is going to again feed into this childhood thing, increased food availability or high-fat diet with increased obesity later in life in the offspring. So it's a futile cycle that is intergenerational futile cycle that is not going to end easily without intervention. So with suboptimal maternal fetal nutritional environment, such as maternal nutrient restriction, gestational diabetes, or maternal obesity, it will have a programming effect at the cellular energy metabolism level, such as how the cells are handling glucose, lipids, or other things like mitochondrial biogenesis, which favors storage and decrease oxidation because it favors these two things to enhance survival based on the signals sent to the fetus during the pregnancy period. Everything the baby does is to enhance the survival. If you give the signals that there is lacking nutrient availability, then of course the baby would start to prepare for enhanced storage and decreased oxidation. So at the adipose tissue level, there would be excess lipid storage, and then excess endoplasmic reticulum stress. In muscles, there will be lipid accumulation. In liver, it would affect gluconeogenesis, lipogenesis, and increase lipid accumulation. Pancreas, there will be impaired glucose sensing and hyperinsulinemia. Cardiovascular system, there will be a lipid accumulation, and then brain, there will be leptin resistance and lipid accumulation. So most of these would contribute somewhat to one of the common chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease or obesity. Another way that fetal programming could happen is by methylation. And this is a study showing that a methylate deficient diet fed to mothers, rat mothers, during the periconception period can actually program glucose homeostasis in males but not females' offspring. So if you feed a diet that has very little methyl donuts in the diet, that is going to affect how the genes are being turned on and off, because most genes are intact in all parts of the body. The way that they're switched on and off is by, there are several ways of doing it. One of the ways is to methylate a gene that it does not want to turn on or it does want to turn on. So without the methyl group, then the genes turning on and off the system to turn genes on and off could not work very well. And it's been shown to affect glucose homeostasis. So on the top, you see plasma glucose level in the control group, where there is sufficient methyl donors, where the genes can be turned on and off correctly. The glucose is lower than the group when there is not enough methyl donors. And in response, there will also be higher insulin level. And this is another study by a group at HKU, Dr. Edmund Lee, to show that supplementation of bitter melon to rats fed a high fructose diet during gestation and lactation can actually reduce the fructose-induced dyslipidemia and hepatic oxidative stress in male offsprings. So supplementing with bitter melon can reduce the serum insulin level back to close to normal level, serum triglyceride even lower than the normal level, and then liver triglyceride and cholesterol close to the normal level. So it affects something called the fibroblast growth factor 21, FGF21, which is something that is found to be associated with risk of obesity later in life. Okay, so with nutrition in childhood, by the end of this lecture series, you should be able to understand the importance of adequate nutrition during childhood, appropriately assess the growth of children, describe and explain the 6 differences in energy and nutrient requirement, and identify key nutrients for this rapid period of growth in the life cycle, and explain the rationale behind the importance. So the definitions of life cycle stages, so mid-childhood is the age 5 to 10 years. Pre-adolescence, that is school age, is the age of 9 to 11 years for girls and 10 to 12 years for boys. The importance of nutrition during childhood could not be underestimated because it's actually the period where the kid is starting to establish their eating habits. And if you can establish healthy eating habits in this life stage, it can help prevent immediate and long-term health problems. Adequate nutrition is also associated with improved academic performance, which is a very good incentive to encourage parents to feed their kids healthy foods. It can also reduce the risk of developing chronic conditions. So you've seen this graph before. So we are at this stage, child malnutrition. So we talked a lot about fetal and infant malnutrition, how it is going to affect the children's child's health status. But child malnutrition can also cause a range of problems such as reduced intellectual potential and reduced school performance, and also obesity, abdominal obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease later in life. With inappropriate food, health, and care can feed into adolescent malnutrition, which can then have flow-on effects later in life. Now, the physiological development in school-age children includes muscular strength, motor coordination, and stamina increase. In early childhood, body fat reaches a minimum, so the baby fat is gone. So it will be at around 16% in girls and 13% in boys. But then it will increase again in preparation for what we call the adolescent growth spurt. And that is the adiposity rebound. Okay? And it starts around 6 years old. Boys would by nature's design to have more lean tissues than girls. So this is what we call the adiposity rebound. So as baby grow in the first 2 years of life, they are going to become more chubby, okay, like the Michelin mascot. And then slowly the baby would lose the body fat to support the rapid growth at around 6 years of age, and then they would start to rebuild their body fat stores. That's the adiposity rebound in preparation for the adolescent growth spurts. So this is data from another study. So most of the adiposity rebound do occur at around 6 years of age, but if you feed the children a high protein diet as a percentage of energy greater than 16%, then the adiposity rebound would occur earlier, about 1 year earlier, which may or may not be good. Okay, so if there is high protein intake early on in life, the short-term effect is, of course, you can accelerate the growth. Okay, and it can cause early adiposity rebound because high protein intake can increase the insulin-like growth factor 1. And protein is an important building block of body tissues. So providing more protein to the children is going to cause accelerated growth and early adiposity rebound. But then, to come with high protein intake, sometimes it is also coming with fat restriction because you're eating more protein in the expense of fat. This fat restriction can reduce leptin level too early. Okay, there will be too early decrease in leptin level, which can result in leptin resistance And then later in life, as adults, these kids would have higher leptin level and body fat. So from 0 to 2 years of age, this is what we call when at the stage where the kid has high plasticity. So shaping, you can shape the endocrine system of the young children. And then at the 8 years of age, there would be a mismatch of the nature's design and what's actually happening. And then at the adult age, there will be inadequate response to a new challenge. So both of these together can increase the risk of adult obesity. And this is data from another study looking at early adiposity rebound or late adiposity rebound. So looking at the two solid black lines, so those who have an early adiposity rebound would actually continue on to have a higher BMI compared with those who have average or late adiposity rebound at the age of 10. Okay, so early adiposity rebound is actually not a good thing. Now, apart from the body size or muscular development, another important development that happens during childhood is cognitive development. And among this, eating behavior is something that we as nutritionists are most interested in. And with eating behaviors, it's no longer just the normal physiology of the body. A lot of other things that could also shape the children or the child's dietary preference. And among this, the preference of parents would highly influence the child's food likes and dislikes. So the simplest way to think about it, the simplest explanation is that if the parent doesn't like something, it is less likely to feature on the dining table or is less likely to be available at home. Say, for example, if the parent doesn't like celery, then of course the parent wouldn't go and buy lots of celery and use it in the cooking. And therefore, the exposure of this child to celery is substantially reduced compared with a family where the parents love celery. So that's one way that the parents' preference can influence the child's food likes and dislikes. And also, the children would model after adults' behavior. So if you have a younger brother or sister at home, you can sometimes see that they are mimicking or mocking the way that the parents are talking, mocking the way that the parents are doing something. They learn very quickly. They gain the habit or they model after the adult's behavior very quickly. But the bad thing is that they would do it both for the healthy and unhealthy behaviors. So it's not just the healthy behaviors that they will be mocking. And therefore, including young children in food shopping, menu planning, and meal preparation can encourage variety in their food consumption. So it increases their sense of participation, it increases their interest in food. So they would feel that they have control of what they're eating. So they're more likely to eat the food that they have a say in choosing. And family mealtime is very important, so eating together as a family should be encouraged. But sadly, because of the dual income family nature of the society in Hong Kong, many parents work long hours and they don't normally get to spend a lot of time together at the dining table, especially when the kid is young, where domestic helpers play a major role in the caretaking. Then this is going to have an effect of the young children's dietary habits. Outside influence, peer influence would become greater as the child's world expands beyond the family. Now they no longer stay at home all day. They will spend some time at school, and when they hit the primary school age, they might be eating lunch at school, or they might even be eating out with their friends after school if they have an AM class. Okay. But importantly, still at home, there are other things that could affect the baby's dietary or the children's dietary preference. So television advertising, or nowadays social media advertising. A lot of these advertising targeting kids are for junk foods. Okay, so more than a third of advertisement targeting children and teens featuring candies and snacks. And this actually study from 2009, and I can only imagine that this has become worse. So we're talking about all advertisement, not just food advertisement. So among all advertisement, a third of these would have featured a junk food. That's talking about television ad. If you recall your experience watching television, if you still do watch television, not Netflix, then think about the types of food advertisement that you see. Have you ever seen a food advertisement that is for a healthy item? I think most of the one that you see would be for things like McDonald's, KFC, or supermarkets selling chocolates or chips, things like that. So this is going to have an effect of the children's food preference. So children would want to try the foods that they see on television. Okay, and fast food. Okay, they have kids meal that has a toy that comes with the kids meal, and that's one way to increase the wants of the children for their products that are mostly unhealthy. And if you look at some data from the United States, fast food brands are actually the ones that are most advertised to children aged 2 to 11 of age. That's in 2012. Okay, so most of these are fast food restaurants, if not all of them. And 3.4 billion was spent on food advertisement, okay, on popular children's websites. Now we're talking about other things than TV. Just in 1 year, $3.4 billion was spent on food advertisement on these websites, and close to 90% of them promoted brands from food companies that promised to only advertise healthy choices to children. So it's showing you that the promises from companies can't really be trusted, because 93% of these advertised products had high levels of fat, sugar, or sodium. So on the one hand, they promise that they are going to advertise good products, but then the studies show that 93% of these products advertised are really bad. So, and they were less likely to meet government recommended nutrition standards for products advertised to children. So it shows you how useless these industry self-regulatory codes are. And of the total ads, about 2/3 of them were for sugary breakfast cereals and fast foods, and then 53% were on 2 websites or more. So snacks are not something that should be banned completely, but it's important to choose healthier ones. Snacks are indeed important to meet nutritional needs because the children are still quite small in size compared with an adult, but their nutrient and energy requirements are not much different from that of an adult. So within the small stomach size of the stomach, they need to feed in a lot of nutrition. And therefore, eating frequently is one way of doing it. Therefore, snacking is important. And there will be food preference development, and it can also start to have some effect. Eating can starting to have some effect on the appetite or satiety. So therefore, a responsive feeding style should be adopted. So responsive feeding style means that you feed in response to hunger cues, rather than assumptions that, oh, you should be hungry after 4 hours without any signs of hunger from the kid. So this figure shows that the body image, the relationship of body image and excessive dieting. So a mother's concern of her own weight can actually influence the feeding practice. So a mother who worries about the body image may selectively or purposefully restrict the intake of the daughter's food because she doesn't want her daughter to be overweight or obese. So there is a positive influence of the mother's restriction of of the mother's perception of the daughter's overweight risk that promotes the mother's restriction of the daughter's eating that again affects the daughter's food intake. This would have an influence on the daughter's relative weight, but the mother's relative weight can also have an indirect effect, direct or indirect effect on the daughter's relative weight. The mother's relative weight has an influence on the mother's perception. If the mother is lean, then she is less likely to think that her daughter is going to be overweight. But if the mother is overweight, then she is going to worry more about the daughter's body weight. And young girls are preoccupied with their body weight and size at an early age, which is something not commonly seen among boys. So parenting styles, on the screen there's a table showing you the different types of parenting styles. And what you should see is the column on feeding style. So there is the authoritative style, which is democratic, that involves nurture the kid, and there's also a structured regime, structured way of feeding. So the feeding practice is responsive, so demanding plus or and responsive. Okay. Authoritarian, on the other hand, is controlling. So it's very restricted, but still very structured, very low in nurturance. So it's a non-responsive feeding style. So the kid's diet is completely controlled by the parents. So the parents would dominate the feeding situation. They would use forceful or restrictive strategies to control meal times. They speak loudly to get the child's attention. They use force feeding, and they overpower the children. So the consequence is that the children might feel distress, or they will start to avoid food or mealtime because this is a stressful condition. And overweight and obesity might result from this. So the child does not develop the ability to self-regulate food intake and to respond to natural hunger or satiety cues. And they might start eating in the absence of hunger because that's what their parents tell them to do. You should eat every 4 hours, okay, for example. And they might have a lower body mass index, on the other hand, because the eating might not be adequate enough. So restrictive type, they might seek out food that has been restricted by parents, and when finding it, they overindulge. So for example, if the kid has never been given the opportunity to eat chocolate after their first bite, okay, so if the parents said chocolate is off the limits, but they will still be able to find chocolate somehow, either from a friend or from a supermarket. If they have pocket money, then they might overindulge if they have the opportunity to do so. This could lead to overweight, but somehow this could also lead to underweight because of the avoidance of food. There could also be an uninvolved parenting style, or indulgent parenting style. Okay, they are also going to cause some issues with the children's food preference and eating habits. So with the uninvolved parents, they are also going to use the non-responsive feeding style, but it is the way that is very uninvolved. So they let the kid decide when and what to eat, as well as how much. Okay, so the kid decides everything. So the child is still unable to respond or recognize their hunger or satiety cues. They eat just because food is there. With the indulgence parenting style, they will indulge the kids. No guidelines regarding food intake. They use food as a reward or as a comforter or to control a child's behavior. You will sometimes see that outside in restaurants, where the parents may try to control the kids' behavior by giving them candies or chocolates. Okay? So the child has a high intake of food that is high in salt and sugar because that's what's usually used as a reward food. And the child has a low intake of fruits and vegetables. So the child is overweight or obese. So how to feed responsively? You should actively engage in conversations and eye contact with your young child during feed times, with clear communication regarding expectations, and respond to hunger and satiety cues. Do not force feed when the children is not hungry, just to fit your schedule. Okay, you need to feed the infants directly or assisting the older children to feed themselves. And you should feed slowly and patiently, encouraging and motivating the child to eat. Never force feed the children. Okay. In this regard, there is now something called BLW, so baby-led weaning, okay, which is starting to instill this sort of responsive eating practice to the parents' feeding regime to let the baby decide what he or she wants to eat when he or she is hungry. So the children can also model the healthy behavior from the parents or caregivers. So they should all make healthy food choices. Okay. And you should offer foods that are healthy, tasty, and developmentally appropriate. So you do not give the 2-year-old a piece of steak, for example, that is not cut up. And to overcome food refusal, you should experiment with different food combinations, taste, and texture, and various methods of encouragement. But more importantly, you should persevere. Okay? You need to persevere before it will work eventually. So the required environment should be pleasant, and the child is seated in a relaxed and comfortable manner, and is sitting face to face with other family members. Minimize distractions, and routines should be established as a result of organized meal times, following a predictable schedule, and eating preferably at the same time and place. Okay, when the child is sick, you need to make some adjustment to your feeding practice, like giving mashed or soft food, especially if he or she has difficulty swallowing. You need to give the child his or her favorite food to encourage consumption, to assist recovery. You need to give small, frequent meals, or you need to breastfeed more often for longer at each feed and increase fluid intake. And when they're recovering, you need to be responsive to the child's increased hunger and escalate the amount of food by giving additional meals or snacks each day or for 2 weeks, and offering more foods per meal. If they refuse to eat, you can give an alternative food, make food more presentable to child. So you may have seen the lunch boxes produced by some mothers, especially the Japanese mums, that look like cartoon characters. That's actually a very good way to get kids to eat the food. And you may want to talk or sing to the child and ensure that the child does not eat alone. If they have a reduced appetite, you need to feed slowly and patiently. Patience is very important when you feed a young child, because they can take their time. They can really take the time when they eat a meal. Sometimes can be as long as 60 minutes to finish one simple meal. And you need to feed them their favorite food, breastfeed more often, provide more feeding opportunities, and prepare smaller portion sizes as opposed to 3 main meals.